Hello, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Janos Nondora from Slovak Academy of Sciences. Today, I will present my paper, which is entitled A Formal Model of Access Token Bifurcation and Integrity-Based Isolation in Windows Kernel Architectures. Okay, our agenda is as follows. Windows operating system trajectory of credential exportation. And then the second point will be that we will explain what is access token, what it's used for. And the third point will be the core problem. We will explain the privilege usability paradox. And then the fourth point will be the four-tower integrity hierarchy. And then in the fifth point, we will explain the mathematical foundations of ACL, which is access control logic. And then the next one, which is the sixth point, will be the proposed algorithm. What we have proposed, this is STGNB, which is token bifurcation and adversarial modeling of UAC. We will explain how attackers can bypass UAC, user access control. And then the last point will be our future work and then how we will strengthen the kernel. Okay. So now let us explain what is ATT, which is Windows Access Token Theory. It's a kernel stored object that acts specifically as a proxy for security principles, identity, and authority. Generally, ADS are stored inside the kernel, which prevents attackers, or let me say teamers, penetration testers from directly interacting with the token or alter it. As we said that the kernel residency, there are tokens that are stored within the kernel, and the security identifier, which is SID, is that every access token is linked or is attached to a particular user through a unique ID. And the split token model, what is it? For local administrators, the kernel generates two different tokens rather than only one splitting token. It's very important. In UAC integration, the user account uses ATT to detach authentication from authorization. Briefly, let me just explain how this works. For example, let's say that an attacker got a foothold access into an environment, and then most of the time, usually, they will have access as a standard user. That means a low privilege user. So if in that environment there is the UAC enabled, it will be hard for the attacker to move laterally as he would wish, because he will not have enough ability to escalate his privileges. So therefore, what he must do first, he has to try to bypass or to defeat this type of security measure, and then we will explain it after how it works. The core problem, the OS challenge. Modern operating system security must balance user administrative power with the protection against malicious inheritance. This is what we have just said. So that means they have to secure the environment in such a way that if in case some internal attackers, would like, to gain themselves more access to any type of environment or other computers or account, so they should be restricted to do so. The evolution, Windows has shifted from simple DAC, which is discretionary access control, to a multiple defenses. Next, a kernel stored object acting as a proxy for a security principle. Now the gap. While empirical observations of defeating techniques exist, there is a lack also of formal mathematical proof regarding the integrity latest and current industry standard. Therefore, we have to acknowledge that and go to it to know how we can bypass that. The four-tower integrity hierarchy. The Windows kernels use what we called MIC, mandatory integrity control, that is defined as follows. The first is like the level, and then the second category is the usage. We will explain it just briefly. The low level is that the sandbox processes such as a web browsers, let's say, and the medium, the default hierarchy for applications executing on the regular user or a standard user. But the high level is that applications that are performed should be performed by the administrator with a higher privilege or elevated privileges. However, it doesn't mean that any local administrator, have the same power like the system, because the system, let's say that the system is the main, or everything is granted to the system because this is the core privilege. So when a user has this type of anti-authority system, let me say that, not only he can act as an administrator, but also he can act as an enterprise administrator, or to get quite everything from the system that he has. Now let me explain from a mathematical standpoint the ACL, what it means. Okay, now let's say that let tube TUP be an access token defined as tube equal sigma, gamma, lambda, phi, omega, and psi. Now, where the sigma belongs to S represents the primary user SID. Then, the gamma, which includes an S, is used to establish and evaluate the group SID. That means including alias, while the lambda represents the logon session identifier. The next one is the phi. The symbol is assigned to the set of the privileges. Let's say that probability 1, probability 2, and so on and so on. And the omega belongs to L, M, H, S variables, represents the mandatory integrity level. Moreover, and lastly, we can we use the symbol psi, which is the token type, the primary version impersonation. The isolation characteristics. This mathematical inequality prevents a medium integrity process from altering a high integrity process, even if they share the same user ID. Now, our proposed algorithm. This is the token bifurcation. Briefly, we split it into 4 main parts. So let's say the first part is the identification process. The kernel identifies if a user is a member of the administrator's group, and if not, it should reject that. But let's go it slow so far. And the generation, it creates the T elevated high integrity full privilege set. And also we use the filtration part. That filtration part, it acts like simultaneously it generates the T limited, which is like the medium integrity, that filtered privilege set. We control and we monitor, we filter which user has which access. And then the linking, which is like the connection, that a logical locally unique identifier correlation is established also between both of the tokens. Now, the adversarial modeling, the user access control defeat. How it works? Most of the time, despite kernel mode barriers, user mode features introduce authorized bypasses. And what I mean by that, let's take it step by step. Auto-elevating COM object. This is like object like iFile operation can trigger elevation via the app info service without the user access control prompt. And then also the dynamic link libraries hijacking can also occur. And this one, attackers can move maliciously some files, some DDL files, from a path from a directory to another directory. And also they can use the registry hijacking, which consists of the medium integrity processes that can alter the hotkey current user to redirect the execution flow of a high integrity binaries, like, let me say, faulthelper.exe application process. Or future work. There exists already many good practice recommendations. However, we know those things, and then attackers also know those things. In our future work, what we will use, we will enforce the hardware integrity. That means we will use the pointer authentication code PSA on the ARM64 architecture to cryptographically sign the token object. And next, we will continue the authorization process. Now, what I mean by that, we will move from point in time checks towards behavioral based temporal tokens. When we move towards a holistic behavior, this is way better because we will automatically and simultaneously bypass the standard or the static detection system. So therefore, everything that we should do from an offensive standpoint, of course, we will have to go to it from a holistic behavior. I mean, from a dynamic behavioral phase, and then after we can move laterally in this from a system or from a device to another device or inside the Active Directory. In a nutshell, we will also address the MLMSE, which is the implementation of machine learning security references monitor to predict the elevation risk scores based on binary entropy and behavior. Okay, thank you so much. If you want to contact me, please, you can write to me via this email address. And if you want to know much more about me, please just scan this QR code. Thank you.